Hello guys, my name is Ausra and welcome to my podcast Thinking in Sound, and today is episode number 16, and today's question is the organ the closest instrument to architecture? And well, I think that answer is yes, but now let me explore and to share some of my thoughts with you about it. In general, I think that any musical instrument is closely related to the history, how the human history developed, and about all its turns and high and low points. Because I think since the very early ages of humanity, people needed music and wanted to have it for various purposes. Of course, probably the most common purpose was just to entertain themselves. So we know that genres for that were the songs, that folk songs, and obviously folk dances, because it's really fun to dance while the music is playing, and the instruments started to develop to help people to achieve this goal, to entertain them. Of course, the most natural instrument and the first instrument was human voice, but then we developed drum instruments, like, I don't know, just banging on the stones or on the pieces of wood, and later the type of wind instruments, woodwind instruments appeared, like imagine playing somebody on the bamboo or another piece of wood, making holes and discovering how all that kind of stuff changed the pitch, and later, of course, more sophisticated instrument appeared. But obviously nothing can compete with a pipe organ. And actually, I think that organ and architecture is very much related. Okay, now I'll take a sip of water from our Secret of Organ playing cup. Vidas will play some music for you at that time. Okay, and now let me continue this topic about organ and architecture. Well, if I'm thinking about in terms of how beautiful the instrument is and how ornate the facade is, I probably would not could compare organ with any other given instruments. Of course, you could have like old pianos that are really ornated and decorated and very beautiful, and instruments like harp is very beautiful too. But in terms of the size and the scope, of course, organ is the largest and the most sophisticated, and it can reflect the architecture the best. Because and of course there are exceptions when organ is just modern, built, let's say, in historical church and all that kind of stuff. And now I'm not talking about the pipes and what is behind the facade, but basically about organ facade. If you would look at the altar and you would turn around and look at the organ balcony, you would see that most of the cases organ facade is a reflection of the main altar. And that's the trick that most famous architects did while building churches and decorating them inside. And if you would have a Baroque church, it will have a very ornated and highly decorated altar, and organ would be also ornated, and would have all those golden carvings all over the place. It's very seldom that you would see, that altar is Baroque style and, let's see, the organ is something else. Usually it's, it's all works in perfect harmony, and it's basically like a duet or like mirror image. And famous musicologist from Yale University, Carol Snyder, wrote a book which was called Organ as a Mirror of Its Time. So I think it's really very good, description of that, and what I'm talking today about, organ facade and architecture. I think it resonates very well with it. And even if you see when Baroque turned into Rococo style, it became even more ornated. And later, when the when romantic period came and people turned back again to the organ loft and started to compose a lot of organ music, and churches actually became, there were many churches built in the Neo-Gothic style. And if you would see at the altar of such church, we would have these very high and steep peaks of wooden carvings. And if you would turn to the organ loft, you would see that organ facade also imitates that. And of course, other kind of alternations. You can have rook positive, you can have, let's say, no rook positive, and the organ can be big or small, but with some extent it always starts and tries to imitate the altar, so we would work both together in the perfect harmony. So I think that organ is very much related to the architecture of the church and interior of the church, especially with the main altar. Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening. This was my episode number 16, and please send me more of your questions because I don't like to come up with my own topics. I would rather discuss the things that is really important to you. And please sign up for my channel if you haven't done it so far. And thank you one more time for listening to my podcast and listening to my channel, and I see you in my next episode next week. Thank you for now, and bye bye.